few things from the Dollar Tree, I'm going to show you how to make a few crafts to get your home ready for Valentine's Day. I thought this set of heart-shaped rings from the Dollar Tree were so unique, and I was really excited to create a project with them. In addition to these rings, I'm also going to be using some of these glitter heart flower picks and a big variety of Valentine's ribbons that I had in my stash. Some are just red, some are pink, some are white, all different colors that represent Valentine's Day. These rings come separate in the pack, so potentially you could make 3 different projects with one pack of these heart-shaped rings, but I wanted my rings to be connected. So I took some craft sticks. These are just the regular tongue depressor size. I cut them down, and you can see here that I have my rings spaced out pretty evenly, and I also have it on my silicone mat because I knew a lot of that hot glue would seep through. So I just placed a little bit of hot glue on each of the rings, and I placed a piece of the craft stick over it. I repeated that 2 more times so that I had 3 different points that would join the rings together to make it a bit more secure. Once I had those 3 pieces of craft stick in place, I then flipped the whole thing over, and on the other side I added more hot glue and I placed 3 more sticks so that I had a nice secure connection on both sides. Next, I got to work creating some scrappy bows on my heart. If you've never made a scrappy bow before, they're really fun and they're really easy. I'm using one of the craft sticks here for reference, so I knew how long to cut my pieces. And you can see I'm starting here with this red burlap type ribbon, and I cut 2 lengths a little bit longer than that craft stick, and I also dovetailed the ends. I made my way down from my widest ribbons to my most narrow ribbons, and on the wider pieces I did go ahead and dovetail all of the ends. On some of the more narrow ribbons, I just cut the ends at a slant, and some of these aren't even ribbons. I have some different types of trim here too. The more variety of colors and textures that you can add to these scrappy bows, the cuter they are. Once I had a good pile of ribbons in place, then I could start assembling my bow. I started again with some of the wider ribbons, and I just laid them in an X pattern, and I kept laying them on top of each other, and I tried to make sure that not only was I varying the sizes and textures of the ribbon, but I was also making sure that I was not placing 2 of the same colors on top of each other. So you can see here I started with a pink, and then I went to red, and then another pink, and now I'm at a white. So just keep layering your ribbons from widest to narrow. Vary the textures and vary the color, and it'll make a really cute bow. Once you have all of your ribbons in place, then you can take another piece of thinner ribbon or even a piece of jute. You could use a zip tie here, and you just want to place it over the middle of the X, scrunch it all together, and tie it in a knot. I only created 2 bows for my heart rings, but depending on how far apart you spaced your craft sticks, you may want to create a few more. Now, because I had tied my bow together with those thinner ribbons, I kept the tails on those thinner ribbons longer so that I could help attach it to my rings. I placed the little hot glue on the top craft stick, and then with those 2 thinner ribbons, I brought it around to the back side, and I just gave it a tie to make it really secure. Once I had those ends tied in place, I did add another dab of hot glue, and I secured everything with a piece of clear tape. It's up to you how you want to decorate this the rest of the way, but since I already had these glitter heart picks on hand, I figured they would look really cute on the bow and in between the 2 bows to cover up that other craft stick. It was really easy to just pull that pick out of the center of the heart, and then I just used some hot glue. I added 1 to each of my bows and 1 in between. I kept the hanger for this heart ring set really simple. I just cut another piece of that thin red ribbon. I looped it through the very top heart ring and did a slip knot, and then I created a little knot on the other end so that I would have a way to hang it. If you've been with me for a while, you know that I love to cut the canvas off of the wooden frames for the Dollar Tree, and I usually use the frame, but I don't always have a use for the canvas material. So I do have a piece of that canvas material. I'm also going to use a roll of material from the Dollar Tree, a little clay pot, and I am using a wooden heart just as a pattern, but if you didn't have a wooden heart, you could just cut a heart out of cardboard. I laid my striped material down on my work surface and I folded it in half so that I could create a double heart. So you can see here, I just laid the wooden heart on top of the material, and using a Sharpie, I traced around the outside of my heart to give myself a pattern. Then I just took a really sharp pair of fabric scissors and I cut both pieces of material at the same time so that both of my hearts would be the same size. Next, I laid one of my hearts down on my silicone mat and I stayed about a ½ inch away from the edge, and I placed a very fine bead of hot glue. Now, I have a fine tip hot glue gun, so this works out pretty perfect for this, but if you would prefer, you could also sew these two hearts together too. So I continued laying a very thin bead of hot glue around the outside of my heart, and when I got to the other end, I made sure that I left a small gap open so that I would have an opening where I could stuff my two hearts. Now, I know this material from the Dollar Tree is really thin and you can see the hot glue through the material, but I actually wanted that this time. I wanted to be able to see that material so that I would have a guide for later on, and it also makes it look like a stitch. So that's what I said, if you like to sew, this would be a good place that you could sew these together instead of gluing them. Now, because I had a lot of this extra material from cutting my hearts out, instead of using regular pillow stuffing, I'm using the same material to stuff my two hearts, especially because this material is so thin you could see through it. So this way, with having the same pattern of material as the stuffing, it blended in a lot better than if I were to use pillow stuffing. It would be really bright white showing through that thinner material. Now, this isn't something that you'd have to worry about if you chose to get material from somewhere else, or if you had some other material already in your stash. If it's a little bit thicker, you could stuff it with just regular pillow stuffing. So once I had it all put together and stuffed, then I just ran hot glue to close up that other side. Once my hot glue was nice and set and cooled down, then I went in with a pair of scissors and I just started cutting fringes all around the outside. That's why I left that ½ inch gap around my heart. I wanted enough space to create a fringe so that I could rough up the outside and give it more of a weathered and distressed look. This would also work really good with felt. If you didn't have any regular pattern material on hand, you could use some felt and you could do everything exactly the same, just hot glue or sew around the edges, and once you have the heart stuffed, you can go back through and cut some fringes for some added texture. After I had my heart all stuffed, I realized I forgot to leave a small opening at the bottom for my dowel rod, so instead I just cut a small slit on the backside toward the bottom, and I was able to slip this dowel rod right through the backside. This actually isn't even a dowel rod, it's just a barbecue skewer, but it's what I had on hand and it works the same. So if you're doing this, maybe leave a little opening at the bottom and it'll make your life a little bit easier. Next, I took my canvas material and you can see here, I'm really roughing it up. I'm scrunching it, I'm rolling it, I'm trying to get a lot of wrinkles. I'm trying to break down that coating that's on the one side. I just really want it to have more of a distressed look, and it's easier to work with once you kind of break that fiber down a bit. So I took my clay pot and I'm laying my canvas over the backside of the pot, and I'm just forming it to the pot. So I keep working it with my hands, smoothing it down over the bottom side of the pot. And once I feel like the material has started to take the shape of the pot, then I grabbed some jute twine and I just tied it around to hold it in place. Once I flip the pot over, then I just cut off any of the excess material. I wanted to leave a little bit above that jute cord, but I didn't want a ton of it sticking out. The last thing I needed to do to finish off my Valentine Topiary was to add a little floral foam to my pot. I put a bunch of hot glue on before I started patting in my Spanish moss. Just be careful with this step because it seems like every time I use hot glue and moss, it always seeps up through and it burns me a little bit. So just be really careful when you're adding your moss. Then I just tucked my heart skewer right into the center of the pot. I'm always checking out the Kirkland's website for inspiration for crafts, and I saw this heart welcome sign that I knew I would be able to put together really quickly. I'm using an old wooden heart that I had on hand. This is from the Dollar Tree, and you can see it has the letter E on it. It was from an older project that I had taken apart. I'm just going to be painting on the back side. I also created a decal using my Cricut with the word welcome, but sometimes you can find those metal words at the Dollar Tree that you could use instead. And of course, I'm going to use a few wooden beads. To get started, I just gave the backside of my wooden heart one coat of red chalk paint. After my paint was really dry, then I applied my decal with some transfer tape. The reason I emphasize that the heart has to be really dry is because the first time I tried to put it on, it wasn't dry enough and it wouldn't stick. So learn from my mistakes. Next, to create the handle for this heart is really simple. I added a bit of hot glue to the end of a piece of thicker jute cord so that it would be easier to string through the hole at the top of the heart. I went from the back side to the front side, and I tied the knot on the front side so that you could see it to give it a little added decoration. Before I moved on to the other side, I did add hot glue again to that jute cord to make it easier to string onto my wooden beads. Now, the wooden beads in the picture were white, but I like the natural look of these wooden beads, so that's what I'm using for mine. I strung the beads on until I felt like I had enough for my hanger, and then I repeated the same thing on the other side, where I went from the back side to the front side and tied my knot. Then I just needed to clip off my excess jute cord. I feel like it wouldn't be a holiday or season if I didn't make some sort of wood bead garland, and I'm always trying to find different ways to make them more unique. I'm using more of those glitter heart picks that I had used earlier. I have these really cool distressed wooden beads that I got on a pre-made garland at an after Christmas sale at Walmart, and I'm also going to use one wooden heart ornament. I only need to paint my heart ornament, but I did want to make sure that I painted the front side and the back side, and I'm using some red chalk paint to cover everything. I took a fairly long strand of thinner jute cord and I folded it in half. The two ends, I used a little hot glue and rolled them together to make it easier to string everything on. I took those two ends and I put it through my wooden heart ornament and then pulled it back through the loop, creating a slip knot. Then in between my sets of beads, I wanted to add these glitter heart ornaments, and because they already had a skewer in one end, I just used that skewer to poke it through the other end. So essentially I was just making a giant glitter heart bead for on my garland. I had two different sizes of these distressed wooden beads, so I created a pattern using 3 of the smaller ones, then 1 of the bigger ones. I repeated that same pattern again, and then I wasn't sure if the heart would sit well on top of one of the larger beads, so I added 1 more small bead before I added in my glitter heart. Now, because this glitter heart was a little bit longer, sometimes I had a little trouble getting the jute cord the whole way through to the other end. So when that would happen, I would just use the skewer that it came on to help poke it through until I got through the other end. Then I just kept repeating that same pattern of 3 small beads, 1 big bead until I had the length of garland that I liked. For the other end of my garland, I just wanted to create a tassel, so I'm using the same jute cord here. I wrapped it around a sanding block about 30 times until I felt like my tassel would be thick enough. Then I cut all of those pieces off of the sanding block, and because I had doubled up the jute cord to string through my beads, I was able to lay all of those strands right in between those 2 pieces of jute cord at the other end of my garland and tie my tassel right onto the end. Once I had it tied on, then I moved about 1 inch down from the end of the beads and I tied 1 more piece of jute cord on to give my tassel a nice finished look. And the last thing I needed to do to finish everything up was just to trim the ends of my tassel to make sure that they were nice and even. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today. If you need more crafting inspiration, check out one of the videos I left on the screen. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.